Have you ever wondered why Linus lives alone in his tent and is reluctant to tell you why? Have you ever wondered who Jasper is? Have you ever wondered who the mysterious Mona from the graveyard is? Well, if you're an average Stardew Valley player, then you have probably wondered at least one of these questions before. I was once just like the average person who wondered about these things, but never had the answer. However, after a lot of research and several epiphanies, I came to realize that there is a lot more to Jasper and Linus's characters than what is presented in the game, so I thought I would shed some more light on these particular characters. Welcome to Solving the Mystery of Linus and Jasper. Now, right before I can get into the meat of this video, I have to first explain a few things, otherwise this video will only half make sense. One day, I was just chilling and watching the updated Stardew Valley iceberg video made by Wollygog, when suddenly Wollygog mentions Jasper. Now in this video, Wollygog presents his favourite theory about Jasper, but doesn't really go into much detail into who they are, so my initial reaction is kind of like, oh, wow, you finally found out who Jasper is. Good job. And I went to message Wollygog in Discord about my favourite theory on Jasper, because I first found out about Jasper sometime in April of this year, when I was first researching for the Dark Side of Stardew Valley Part 1 video. So I tried to find the original theory that I liked, but I couldn't, so I attempted to recite it from memory, and while doing so, I realised that Wollygog's favourite theory actually linked into my favourite theory very, very well, and it kinda completed it in a way. Like all the weak links in my theory finally made sense because of Wollygog's theory, and vice versa. Now this may be an abrupt ending, but that's all the context you need to know, for now. So let's move on to who is Jasper. If you've ever taken the time to actually read all the lost books, you would realize that there is 1, some pretty interesting stuff contained in these library books, and 2, a mysterious person called Jasper. Jasper appears to be the author of 3 of these library books. These 3 books being A Study on Diamond Yields, unsurprisingly a study on the rarity of diamonds, Mysteries of the Dwarf, a book that explains almost all you need to know about dwarves, and a book you will see referenced a lot in the Dark Side of Stardew Valley Part 2 whenever the hell I get around to finishing that, and lastly a book called Goblins, a book about, yes, you guessed it, goblins. Now remember these library books because I'm gonna come back to them later in the video. Anyway, you're probably currently thinking something like, yeah, sure, Jasper may be the author of some interesting books, but who actually are they? Well, in the game itself, these 3 books are the only entries Jasper has in the game, or besides Secret Note 24, which contains some basic information about the Genomos that again, I'll come back to later in the video. So this is where the 2 fan theories that actually make sense when presented with the facts in the game come into play. According to Wollygog's theory,
for identity. This refers to a very cool fan theory that I really like. Basically, it entails that the wizard, Merlin, Linus, and Jasper were an adventuring group that would explore the mines, fight monsters, and find treasure. They broke up and went their separate ways, however, when Jasper died in one of their adventures, which would explain her being in the graveyard. This would also explain Linus and the wizard being friends.
Now, as Wollygog said, this could be the explanation for why Linus and the wizard are friends, and why there is a mysterious Mona in the graveyard. And something else I want to say about the graveyard is that out of the 4 tombstones in the graveyard, 3 are technically readable, and one of the graveyards that are technically readable just says it's old and faded, which leaves only 2 readable graveyards left with information on them. One of these readable graveyards has a whole ass poem written into it which says, "Stand between the pillars 3, with a gift as precious as the sky. A rainbow forged from land, not sea, then galaxies will heed your cry." Also, by the way, you can only properly read this after you've donated all 4 of the dwarf scrolls to the museum and you can read Dwarvish, as this is a dwarf's headstone. But basically, what this poem is telling you to do is to hold a prismatic shard above your head and stand in the middle of these 3 pillars in the desert. And once you have done all these actions, you will receive a gift of sorts. This gift being the Galaxy Sword, which was once the best sword in the game. Now, considering the fact that Concerned Ape has crammed such a hint into something as insignificant as a tombstone in a graveyard in a farming game, I think it's quite possible that this Mona could be more than just a random name on a tombstone, and someone who is much more involved in the Stardew Valley lore than we realize. Like, Mona from the graveyard being the person that travelled around with the wizard and Linus is just an educated guess, with no real hard evidence to back it up. However, this is where my favourite theory about Mona comes into play. While researching and scripting for this video, I somehow managed to find where my favorite theory had originated from. I was kinda surprised I found this because this wasn't even a random Reddit post, it was a random comment on a random Reddit post of someone asking who Jasper was. This theory goes as follows. I have a headcanon that they're the mysterious Mona buried in the graveyard. Abigail may have looked up to them for their work in the mines and their adventurous spirit. That's why she visits them. It can be inferred that Jasper hasn't written in quite a while, since their books are lost when you find them, so it isn't a far reach to say that they may be deceased. Mona is a feminine name in English, so Abigail may have also had a strong female idol among the many books in the library, or even have met Mona at some point in her childhood. There are no gender markings among the writings, so there's no way to be certain of their gender. Speculation here, they could have died in the mines or on their travels and then entered in Stardew as a town legend. That would be why their work is featured in the library. Their work on dwarfs, minerals, and goblins was printed for future generations to keep the adventuring spirit alive. This theory does raise some excellent points. However, I want to deconstruct it and dive deeper into some of the points presented to show you how good this theory really is. Midway through, the theory states, it can be inferred that Jasper hasn't written in quite a while since their books are lost when you find them, so it isn't a far reach to say that they may be deceased. Now this is true, but just think about it for a second. Who was heavily involved with Jasper? That's right, the wizard, and Linus. Now the wizard is a magical being that doesn't age, or at least doesn't age visibly, so that just leaves us with Linus. And if you look at Linus, what do you notice? That's right, grey hair. And grey facial hair. Now I know you can go grey at a young age, but for the majority of the population this is not the case. To me, Linus looks somewhere around the 50 to 60 year old range, although he could be younger / older. And if stopped adventuring due to Mona's death around the age of 20 to 30, this 20 to 30 year period where Jasper is dead would definitely be enough time for these books that Mona once wrote to become lost. But if you've watched this far into the video, then you should know by now that I have more proof to back up my claims of Linus being old by just his appearance. Because in his Festival of Ice dialogue, he states, "Igloo buildings and art I picked up from the tundra dwellers who lived beyond the frozen sea." That was many years ago. An igloo makes a nice home, but it's easier just to stay in my tent all year round. And if you're 50 to 60 years old, adventuring around the world when you were 20 to 30 years old would be something you did many years ago. You heard it from the man himself. Something else that I would like to talk about in this theory is about Abigail. Abigail may have looked up to them for their work in the mines and their adventurous spirit. That's why she visits them. Now I completely agree with this, but how do we know that Abigail draws inspiration from Mona in some way, shape or form? Well, if you take a look at Abigail's schedule, then you will notice that it is quite common to see Abigail in the graveyard, and when she is in the graveyard, she is always at Mona's headstone in particular. And out of all the townsfolk, Abigail is one of the few members in the community that seems interested in adventuring and going into the mines. But the thing is, Abigail is a girl, and in Stardew Valley, the gender stereotype around adventurers are strong men that are capable of mining large rocks and fighting off enemies. Scumbag Pierre, Abigail's father, is known to play into the stereotype, as seen in Abigail's 6th heart cutscene. That, by the way, happens in the graveyard while Abigail is standing in front of Mona's headstone. This is why I think it would make a lot of sense to conclude that if Mona was female, then she would have been a strong female role model for Abigail, as she would probably need one to pursue interest in a hobby that contains mainly opposite-gendered people, especially when her own father is against her participating in these acts, as he sees them as not something a woman should be doing. Not a good look, Pierre. Now you're probably thinking something like, yeah, you've told me all about this Jasper person, and you've solved most of the mystery surrounding their name. However, this isn't the mystery of Jasper. This video is called Solving the Mystery of Linus and Jasper. So what's going on with Linus? Well, Linus is a similarly mysterious character in the game who always talks about living out in the open by choice, but never wants to explain exactly why he chooses to live out there. And because Linus is heavily connected with Jasper, I thought I would read all of Linus's dialogue again to see if I could find any evidence or clues about who Jasper was. And if you read Linus's dialogue with zero context, then you don't really find anything. However, once I read Linus's dialogue again, but with the context of who Jasper was and Linus's past life, everything started to make sense. For example, these two dialogues indicate that Linus is always for some reason interested in you going into and exploring the mines. We can also safely infer from these two dialogues that Linus has gone into the mines before, except we don't even need to infer because he literally tells us here in this dialogue. I've explored deep into the caves. They hold some hidden secrets. Just be cautious if you go in there. Now, why would Linus love going into the caves? Well, as we established before, it would be because he loves adventuring and it's something he's used to doing. Also, another piece of dialogue that proves Linus used to explore, which you might remember from earlier in the video, is his dialogue at the Festival of Ice. You might remember this from earlier in the video. Igloo buildings and art I picked up from the tundra dwellers who lived beyond the frozen sea. That was many years ago. An igloo makes a nice home, but it's easier just to stay in my tent year round. For those of you who don't know, the Gem Sea makes up the entire southern coast of Pelican Town. For Linus to be in the frozen sea, he would have had to have travelled far away from Stardew Valley in his past life. Also, because I've proved that Linus used to travel around the world, he fits into the travelling group theory that Wollygog stated at the start of the video even more. The next interesting piece of dialogue from Linus states, I also spend a lot of time reading. One of the reasons I stopped in the valley was the Great Library. And who is a person that loves writing books about his adventures, who also happens to have books in the Great Library? Yep, that's right. Jasper. Linus loves to read the books of his past friend. Now the two most commonly asked questions about Linus are 1. Who really is Linus? And 2. Why does he live in a tent? Also, a third less frequently asked question would be why is he so reluctant to tell you why he chooses the life he does? Well, just think about it for a second. Linus seems to want to live out in the open, in nature, and is used to travelling around exploring new lands. So what would his ideal housing be? That's right, a tent. It's portable and it poses no risk to this nature that he seems to dearly love. I've already answered who Linus really is, but I still haven't explained question 3. Why is Linus so reluctant to tell you why he chooses the life he does? Well, for one, he doesn't really trust strangers, because most strangers in the town are hostile towards him because he is unknown. But also because 2, his closest or second closest friend ever, Mona, is dead. And part of, or the full reason why Linus decided to settle down in Stardew Valley was because of Mona's death. And if Linus was to tell you why he chooses to live the life he does, he would be forced to tell you a long story that involves the death of his possibly closest friend, which would be unimaginably painful to do so. It can also be very hard to open up to new people after the loss of a close one, even after 30 odd years. That's why Linus always says, some things are best left unsaid. Something at the start of this video that I said I would explain, which I haven't explained yet, is Secret Note 24. It reads, it's a page from Jasper's book. The creatures, known by some as forest spirits or Junimos, are said to appear in abandoned buildings after they've gone to seed. As a general rule, when humans leave and nature begins to reclaim her territory, the Junimos will undoubtedly appear. Folk wisdom holds that the Junimos display some kind of resonant affinity with gemstones that are placed inside their little huts. As far as I know, even the mere existence of these creatures has never been proven. Now basically what the secret note tells you is why the Junimos appeared in the community center, and that if you put a gemstone in a Junimo hut, then all the Junimos that belong to the hut will change to the color of the gem. Now I've gotten the game tip out of the way, let's get into the lore of this particular secret note, because think about it for a second. The wizard seems to know about Junimos when you first arrive in Pelican Town. However, Jasper states in this book that the mere existence of these creatures has never been proven. But Jasper used to hang around the wizard, so he should know that the Junimos are real, right? Well, no, because as we already discussed, it has been at least a long time since Jasper and the wizard had last spoken due to Mona's death. And the wizard is always banging on about how he dedicates his life to studying the elementals and all that stuff. So in the possible decades since Mona's death, it looks like the wizard has somehow proven the existence of the Junimos. Linus's close connection with the wizard is also probably the reason why he too is always banging on about how nature is so beautiful. And if you listen closely, it talks to you. But the wizard doesn't have all the answers at first, because the first time you meet the wizard, after you've looked at the rat pulp in the community center, he's basically like, yep, the Junimos, they exist, I already know that. But then he looks all confused and is like, Yeah, I know they exist, but why are they at the community center? So he goes to take a look at their community center, and after he has had a look at the community center, he finally comes to an understanding of who the Junimos are, and gets you to drink a suspicious green liquid. Which means, for the wizard, you are the final piece of the puzzles of the Junimos. So, what have we learned from this video? Well, Mona, also known as Jasper, once travelled around with the wizard and Linus on adventures of sorts. Mona died, probably in one of these adventures, and was buried in the graveyard of Pelican Town. For one reason or another, Linus and the wizard also settled down in the same town. A few of Jasper's books became lost over time, and can be recovered and placed in the library. Jasper is also an influential figure in the life of Abigail. One of these reasons could be because Mona was a female role model for Abigail, if Mona was indeed female. Regardless, she was still a role model for Abigail. Linus also is deeply affected by the loss of potentially his closest friend, Mona. This death is the reason why he is so reluctant to tell people like you about why he chooses to live out in the open, even after you've gained 10 hearts with him. People fearing him because of his uncanny choices in life doesn't help this either. One last thing I would like to put out there is that I find it kind of funny that the only two people in Pelican Town that are feared and both kind of blackballed from the town in a way are the wizard and Linus, the two close friends of the once lived Mona. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, the two theories that were presented here in this video are still theories, and not fact. Even though it seems very unlikely, for all we know, Jasper could be someone like Marlin from the Adventurers Guild, or Rasmodius, aka the Wizard. However, when you take an in-depth look at the facts that are presented in the game, these two theories do start to make a lot of sense, and are a lot more logical than some of the far-fetched Stardew Valley theories that are out there. Also, Concerned Ape, if you've somehow found this video, can you please tell me how right or wrong I am about everything from Jasper to Linus to Mona in this video, because I'd rather have my dreams shattered by the truth than to live by a lie.